Adam Schiff had completely failed to produce a single syllable for 14 agonizing seconds. The official Senate lapel pin fastened to his $3,000 tailored jacket had noticeably shifted roughly 4 degrees away from a perfect vertical alignment. His right hand was absolutely no longer attempting to casually adjust the jewelry. Instead, his fingers were desperately gripping the pin, mirroring exactly how a drowning victim clutches a random piece of floating debris, not under the assumption that the wood will magically rescue him, but simply because releasing his grip guarantees an even worse fate. Stationed directly across the central aisle, a rural attorney originating from Madisonville, Louisiana, resting at 73 years of age, peered intensely at his opponent over the top edge of his reading spectacles. He politely informed the senator that he intended to present the inquiry exactly one final time before completely abandoning the effort. He stated his reasoning, claiming he genuinely believed the 4 million American citizens currently tuning into the broadcasted hearing had successfully deduced the correct answer independently. The physical document folder resting upon the desk positioned in front of John Neely Kennedy remained firmly open, displaying page 7. This specific page showcased a formal Fannie Mae refinancing affidavit officially dated April 19, 2011. Adam Schiff's authentic signature was clearly visible, resting at the absolute bottom of the document. Schiff remained completely mute. Obliterate that like button immediately and hit subscribe, because exactly what you are preparing to witness is the specific morning an unassuming country lawyer wielding 4 simple manila folders strolled confidently into a massive Senate hearing chamber. He patiently absorbed Adam Schiff aggressively insulting his intelligence for 4 consecutive minutes. Following that opening barrage, the rural attorney spent the subsequent 52 minutes meticulously and methodically vaporizing absolutely every single massive fabrication that specific politician had aggressively sold to the American public over the previous 8 years. He executed this total destruction on live national television, utilizing undeniable physical receipts. Let us briefly rewind the timeline exactly 53 minutes prior to the precise moment Adam Schiff committed the absolute most catastrophic error any prosecuting attorney is capable of making. He arrogantly assumed he was operating as the elite prosecutor, rather than recognizing he was actually functioning as the prime target of a highly sophisticated rural accountant. Adam Schiff was exactly 3 minutes deep into his introductory monologue. The Senate lapel pin resting upon his pristine navy blue suit remained perfectly aligned at the time. His premium-branded sparkling water bottle sat completely undisturbed upon the table. He previously reviewed the official witness roster during his evening flight originating from Los Angeles the night before. Absolutely 0 names printed upon that list generated any genuine anxiety for him. He addressed the room, politely reminding his esteemed colleague that the massive responsibilities executed by the committee fundamentally surpassed the simplistic duties associated with operating a rural bait shop. He emphasized they were actively navigating matters carrying immense constitutional weight. He requested the senator hailing from Louisiana respectfully recognize they were currently operating within the highly prestigious United States Senate. The Democratic faction occupying the elevated platform offered a collective, patronizing smile. An administrative staffer sitting comfortably within the second row offered a subtle, supportive thumbs-up gesture. Exactly what Schiff completely failed to comprehend was the reality that the rural attorney originating from Madisonville invested the entirety of his previous evening sequestered inside a third-floor office located within the Russell Senate office building. He spent those hours flanked by 2 dedicated administrative staffers assigned to the Senate Banking Committee while obsessively reviewing 3 massive printed analyses generated directly by the Federal Housing Finance Agency alongside a solitary manila folder. They successfully finalized the assembly of that specific folder at precisely 11:17 in the evening. He physically transported the file back to his residence, thoroughly reviewed the contents, executed 1 single telephone conversation lasting exactly 6 minutes, and promptly retired to bed. That exact same folder was currently resting upon the lower testimony bench directly in front of him. Schiff possessed more insults to hurl. He continued his monologue, noting that while he absolutely respected the senator's legal credentials originating from a respectable state university, He felt compelled to gently remind his colleague that not every individual present studied constitutional law utilizing antiquated textbooks published prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. Schiff confidently reclined back into his leather chair. His dedicated communications director, stationed in the peripheral wings, delivered a solitary, methodical nod mirroring the exact motion a theatrical director utilizes upon the successful conclusion of a scene. Positioned across the central aisle, Senator John Neely Kennedy entirely refused to issue an immediate verbal response. He methodically picked up his wire-rimmed spectacles and removed them from his face. He extracted a pristine white cloth handkerchief from the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He meticulously polished the right lens before repeating the process on the left lens. He neatly folded the cloth into a compact square and carefully returned it to his pocket. He placed the spectacles back onto his face. He reached for his provided hydration container, which was simply standard, unbranded plastic issued by the hearing facility. He casually twisted the plastic cap completely off. He consumed a minor sip of the liquid. He securely twisted the cap back into position. He placed the plastic bottle back onto the wooden desk exactly 2 inches to the left of its original location. He finally reached forward to grasp the manila folder. He cracked it open directly to the 4th page. He secured the document open utilizing his left hand. He still refrained from speaking. Exactly 12 agonizing seconds ticked away in silence. Kennedy eventually rotated the microphone directly toward his position. He politely thanked Senator Schiff for his incredibly hospitable, welcoming remarks. The thick Southern inflection remained highly prominent. It was absolutely not a manufactured theatrical drawl. It was an authentic, deeply rooted Madisonville inflection. He noted the senator was likely aware of his geographical origins, mentioning his father previously operated a modest bait shop situated down near the Chefuncto River, primarily specializing in selling live worms. He recalled a specific piece of advice his father routinely offered during his upbringing. He quoted his father explaining that whenever an individual squanders the initial 3 minutes of a dialogue aggressively explaining exactly how unintelligent you are, that same individual is rapidly preparing to execute something incredibly foolish themselves. The heavy drawl metaphorically tipped its hat in acknowledgement of the folksy wisdom. He casually remarked he consistently viewed that specific guidance as exceptionally sound advice. The Democratic faction occupying the elevated platform offered another collective smile, though this specific reaction materialized significantly slower than the previous instance. A fellow senator seated precisely 3 chairs away from Schiff released a solitary, involuntary chuckle before immediately suppressing the reaction. Kennedy completely refused to lift his gaze away from the open folder. He addressed the senator, announcing his intention to present a handful of inquiries regarding a specific residential property located in Potomac, Maryland. The patronizing smiles instantly vanished from the room. Schiff's right hand physically traveled toward his lapel pin for the very first instance that entire morning. Page 4 consisted of a black and white photocopy that was marginally crooked upon the paper, resulting from the original document resting slightly askew upon the digital scanner. Printed prominently across the top utilizing the exact same standard sans serif typography Fannie Mae consistently deployed since the Reagan administration was the phrase Uniform Residential Loan Application Refinance. Kennedy elevated the paper high enough for the robotic C-SPAN broadcasting camera to successfully locate the text. The automated camera locked onto the document. The broadcast producer operating inside the C-SPAN mobile unit parked directly outside the Hart building spoke the command zoomed directly into his communication headset. The specific signature located at the absolute bottom of page 4 instantly dominated 12 million American television screens simultaneously. The signature clearly displayed the name Adam B. Schiff. Kennedy casually asked the senator if the displayed ink was indeed his authentic signature. The slick, polished veneer coating Schiff's vocal delivery remained partially intact at this specific juncture. The polished tone would entirely evaporate by minute 18, but it successfully held its ground at minute 12. He addressed Senator Kennedy, arguing the displayed document was currently undergoing a severe mischaracterization. He claimed the FHFA referral represented merely one component of a massive politically motivated conspiracy. Kennedy immediately interrupted the defense, noting he absolutely never asked the politician regarding the FHFA referral. The heavy drawl remained incredibly gentle, bordering on neighborly, mirroring the exact tone an individual utilizes when politely offering to assist a stranger transporting groceries. He firmly reminded the politician he simply asked about the authenticity of his personal signature. He repeated the demand, asking if the ink belonged to him or not. Schiff frantically shifted his gaze toward his communications director stationed in the wings. The communications director was a professional named Sarah Lynn, whose corporate LinkedIn profile proudly boasted her title as Senior VP of Strategic Communications representing an elite beltway firm operating across 3 major cities. She was currently glued to her cellular device. She was actively transmitting text messages. She completely refused to establish eye contact with her employer. That specific action represented the initial warning sign of impending disaster. He desperately argued the document successfully speaks for its own contents. He added that within an authentic legal courtroom, such aggressive tactics are typically categorized as fishing for an objection. He failed to realize that inside a highly publicized Senate hearing broadcast to 4 million viewers, the tactic is categorized as something entirely different. A journalist seated in the second row, representing a distinctly left-leaning publication that had aggressively shielded Schiff from criticism for 6 consecutive years, jotted a solitary sentence into his notepad. The sentence bluntly stated he failed to deny the signature's authenticity. Kennedy entirely refused to aggressively press the issue any further. He possessed absolutely no need to do so. He casually confirmed the document certainly speaks for itself. He smoothly lowered the printed page. The heavy drawl metaphorically flipped over an entirely new card in the deck. He explained exactly what the document stated, noting that on April 19, 2011, the politician formally swore under the threat of federal perjury penalties that a specific residential structure located in Maryland functioned as his primary domicile. He rapidly produced a secondary photocopy from the file. This specific document prominently featured the official seal representing Los Angeles County, stamped across the top. It utilized the exact same standard typography alongside identical aggressive declaratory phrasing. He introduced the paper as a formal Los Angeles County Assessor's homeowner exemption application filed during that exact same year of 2011. He identified the targeted property as a condominium complex situated in Burbank, California. He noted the official document mandates the applicant formally certify that the listed property functions as his primary domicile within the state of California. He bluntly informed the senator he successfully signed this specific document as well. He deployed a highly calculated pause to let the reality sink in. He specified the date as April 28, 2011. He deployed a secondary, slightly longer pause. He brutally highlighted the fact that this secondary signature occurred a mere 9 days following the execution of the Maryland document. The entire designated press section descended into an absolute paralyzed silence. A pair of journalists seated in the second row were currently jotting down the exact same numerical digit. The specific number recorded was 9. Over in the peripheral wings, Sarah Lynn entirely ceased transmitting text messages. She was currently gripping the cellular device limply by her side with the digital screen facing downward. She held the device, mimicking the exact posture individuals adopt when they suddenly recognize that whatever message they originally intended to transmit is absolutely no longer the most critical priority occupying the room. Kennedy casually mentioned that down in Madisonville, whenever a gentleman successfully informs 2 separate financial institutions of the exact same reality on 2 completely different dates, the locals simply categorize that behavior as displaying proper manners. The heavy drawl marginally elevated its pace. He brutally contrasted this by noting that whenever an individual informs 2 separate financial institutions of completely contradictory realities occurring within the exact same calendar month, the locals categorize the behavior as something entirely different. He deployed a third devastating pause. He explicitly identified the behavior as a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1014, which specifically covers transmitting fraudulent statements toward a recognized financial institution. He noted the severe penalty carries a maximum sentence of 30 years inside a federal penitentiary. A highly distinct, subtle noise erupted from the designated press section. It completely failed to register as a genuine laugh, nor did it resemble a shocked gasp. It was a unique sound occupying the terrifying space separating the two reactions. It represented the exact specific noise a seasoned journalist instinctively produces when they suddenly recognize the primary focus of their intended article has violently morphed right before their eyes. Kennedy entirely refused to pause his assault to enjoy the reaction. He absolutely never sought personal enjoyment while operating in front of broadcasting lenses. He rapidly produced 3 additional photocopied documents in rapid succession, distributing them exactly how a seasoned card player deals a fresh hand across a kitchen table. He declared he possessed a total of 5 distinct copies of the fraudulent paperwork. He rattled off the corresponding years, listing 2009, 2011, 2012, and 2013, alongside the original purchase agreement executed back in 2003. He hammered home that every single document involved the exact same property, featured the identical fraudulent certification, and contained the same authentic signature. He summarized the massive fraud as encompassing 5 separate Fannie Mae financial loans. He firmly snapped the manila folder completely shut. He informed the senator that Fannie Mae's Internal Financial Crimes Division officially deployed a highly specific, damning phrase within an authentic letterhead document dated May 2025. He clarified the specific vocabulary originated entirely from their investigators rather than his own personal analysis. He quoted the explosive phrase, citing a sustained pattern of possible occupancy misrepresentation. He brutally reminded his opponent that this devastating conclusion originated directly from the premier federal mortgage insurance provider operating within the United States. He explicitly stated they were actively subjecting the politician to a massive federal investigation. He identified the current director of the FHFA as Mr. William P., acknowledging he was absolutely appointed by the Trump administration, while brutally pointing out his actual professional mandate requires him to aggressively combat massive mortgage fraud. He revealed the director formally transmitted a criminal referral directly toward the sitting attorney general. He noted the referral explicitly cited 4 distinct federal criminal statutes, specifically listing wire fraud, mail fraud, bank fraud, alongside transmitting fraudulent statements toward a recognized financial institution. He hammered home that these massive allegations involved the actual federal criminal code. He brutally clarified the document absolutely did not represent a mere opinion piece published within a newspaper. This specific moment marked the precise juncture where Adam Schiff began frantically executing complex mental mathematics. He successfully ran the exact same legal calculations during his evening flight departing LAX toward Reagan National Airport the previous night, while cruising somewhere over the state of Nebraska. He successfully executed the identical mental math earlier that exact morning while riding comfortably in the rear seating compartment of the luxury Lincoln Town Car his campaign operation procured. He successfully ran the numbers one final time while relaxing inside the facility's green room immediately prior to entering the massive hearing chamber. During every single previous attempt, the legal mathematics produced the exact same comforting conclusion. The mandated statute of limitations regarding a Section 14 violation strictly expired following 10 years. The absolute final fraudulent statement submitted upon a Fannie Mae document occurred way back in 2013. A decade removed from 2013 landed squarely in 2023, and the current calendar year was significantly past that specific expiration date. He previously concluded his overall criminal exposure regarding the specific false statement statute was entirely blocked by the legal time limit. He structurally engineered his entire defensive strategy relying exclusively upon that exact mathematical reality. Exactly what he completely failed to factor into his complex calculations was the devastating reality that the criminal referral absolutely did not require a successful judicial conviction to completely obliterate his career. The document solely required being aggressively recited aloud on live national television by a rural attorney wielding a manila folder in front of 4 million actively engaged viewers. The complex legal mathematics currently bouncing around his skull at minute 15 of the massive hearing suddenly provided significantly less comfort than it initially generated while cruising over Nebraska. Kennedy continued his relentless assault, noting that while the politician was actively certifying to Fannie Mae that Maryland functioned as his primary domicile to successfully secure a significantly reduced interest rate across 5 distinct refinancing events, because primary residency loans inherently cost far less capital than secondary residency loans, he was simultaneously claiming a highly lucrative California homeowner's tax exemption regarding his Burbank condominium. The heavy drawl slowly elevated its gaze for the very first instance. He established direct, unbroken eye contact with Schiff entirely across the massive room. He asked the senator if he possessed any genuine knowledge regarding exactly how much massive financial capital that specific California exemption successfully generated. He estimated the total benefit hovered around $7,000 annually removed directly from his 1% property tax burden spanning roughly a decade. The devastating mathematics hovered heavily within the quiet hearing room, resembling an inflated balloon. Absolutely nobody possessed the courage to violently pop. He explicitly stated the total equated to $70,000, consisting entirely of California taxpayer capital, directly entering the politician's personal pockets, while he actively fed the exact opposite narrative to Maryland financial institutions. Over in the peripheral wings, Sarah Lynn's cellular device, the exact same phone she had been gripping limply by her side with the screen facing downward, completely slipped free from her sweaty grasp and violently struck the marble flooring of the heart-building corridor, producing a highly distinct flat slapping noise. A pair of camera operators clearly registered the sound. One professional simply continued rolling his footage without interruption while the other briefly shifted his gaze directly toward her. She completely refused to bend downward to retrieve the dropped device. That specific action represented the secondary warning sign of impending disaster. Kennedy addressed the senator, noting he had actively practiced law for roughly the exact same duration his opponent had. He expressed his desire to remain entirely fair regarding a specific nuance. The heavy drawl adopted an entirely fresh vocal register. It became highly conversational and almost deeply regretful, mirroring the exact tone a rural physician deploys when explaining a highly concerning medical diagnosis to a patient who will likely survive the ordeal but absolutely will not recover in the precise manner he desperately hoped to achieve. He acknowledged there are absolutely legitimate situations where an elected member of Congress authentically occupies dual residential properties throughout the entire calendar year. He conceded they are fundamentally required to maintain a presence within Washington while simultaneously remaining actively engaged within their home states. He noted the federal mortgage code completely comprehends this complex dynamic. He explained the existence of a specific protocol known as an occupancy designation. He detailed the process requires the applicant to formally declare exactly which property functions as the primary residence and which property serves as the secondary location, requiring them to pay the corresponding financial rates associated with those choices. He reiterated that primary properties secure a significantly lower interest rate, while secondary properties trigger a substantially higher financial burden. He emphasized that specific arrangement is the fundamental foundation of the entire agreement. He stated the entire domestic financial structure relies entirely upon individuals successfully telling the absolute truth while completing that singular specific document. He deployed a highly calculated pause. He brutally informed the senator he completely failed to select a singular option. The heavy drawl dropped to an incredibly quiet volume, forcing the C-SPAN audio engineer to immediately crank the microphone gain up 2 distinct notches. He accused the politician of aggressively selecting both options simultaneously for 10 consecutive years across 5 entirely separate Fannie Mae financial loans. He noted he executed this massive deception while simultaneously informing the state of California, operating entirely under the severe penalty of perjury upon a completely different government form, that the California property functioned as his absolute only primary residence. A tiny, fleeting smile appeared upon Kennedy's face. It was neither entirely cruel nor genuinely kind. He bluntly informed his opponent that the federal mortgage system simply lacks the structural capacity to accommodate an individual who arrogantly demands two primary residencies. He offered a devastating comparison, noting it perfectly mirrors aggressively demanding the IRS grant two entirely separate sets of dependent tax deductions utilizing the exact same single child. He stated the IRS severely frowns upon that specific type of behavior. He added that Fannie Mae shares that exact same intense disapproval. The designated press section entirely refrained from laughing at the analogy. They had successfully learned by minute 15 that Kennedy's folksy humor rarely functioned merely as harmless jokes. The jokes operated exactly like massive tow trucks. They aggressively hooked onto the heavy body of the core argument and violently dragged it relentlessly forward. He calculated the massive savings generated by the deception, noting the total financial benefit of successfully securing primary classification instead of accepting the required secondary status. According to a lead industry analyst who thoroughly reviewed his specific loan parameters, resulted in somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 in saved interest payments spanning the entire lifespan of the various loans. He added that massive figure to the $70,000 generated via the fraudulent California tax exemptions. He concluded they were discussing utilizing incredibly conservative estimates, a total financial benefit easily exceeding $100,000 directly entering the personal bank account of a sitting member of Congress spanning a decade. He emphasized the massive capital was drained directly from two entirely separate state systems, both of which possess the absolute legal right to demand the unfiltered truth. Schiff's vocal projection finally returned to the confrontation. The slick polish was significantly thinner this time around. He was absolutely no longer reciting from meticulously prepared talking points. He was desperately scrambling for any viable defense, mirroring the exact frantic motion a terrified individual utilizes when blindly reaching for a handrail while stumbling through a pitch-black corridor. He addressed Senator Kennedy, arguing his California and Maryland residential addresses were both actively listed as primary domiciles strictly for loan application purposes, simply because both properties are actively occupied throughout the entire calendar year. He desperately attempted to add they required that specific classification to successfully distinguish them from a standard vacation property. Kennedy immediately raised a single finger into the air to halt the pathetic explanation. He politely informed his opponent that his frantic word salad absolutely failed to qualify as a legitimate answer. He brutally categorized the response as a prepackaged generic press release. The Democratic faction occupying the elevated platform entirely failed to smile during this exchange. The specific senator seated precisely 3 chairs away from Schiff, the exact individual who previously chuckled at minute 4 before immediately catching himself, was currently intensely studying the acoustic ceiling tiles located above his head. He had successfully identified the specific tile positioned directly above his chair over the past 45 seconds and was currently actively reading the microscopic manufacturer's stamp printed onto the material. Kennedy countered the pathetic defense, noting the federal mortgage code absolutely does not define a primary residence as wherever an individual randomly decides to sleep during any given month. He emphasized the legal code explicitly utilizes the word primary, emphasizing it as an entirely singular concept representing exactly one location. He hammered home the absolute core definition of the word primary, entirely dictates there can only be a single option selected. He reminded his opponent he was a highly educated attorney. He aggressively amplified the point by noting he was a highly prestigious Harvard-educated attorney. He stated the politician perfectly comprehended the actual definition of the word primary. The heavy drawl remained incredibly patient. He explained that within the English language, the word primary literally translates to one. He repeated the translation in Spanish, saying uno. He stated an individual absolutely possesses the right to maintain a primary and a secondary property. He firmly declared an individual completely lacks the right to maintain a primary property alongside another primary property. He offered another devastating analogy, noting it perfectly mirrors claiming you possess a legal wife alongside another legal wife. He casually mentioned that individuals residing down in Louisiana possess a highly specific vocabulary term designed to describe that exact scenario. He politely declined to broadcast the specific insult on live television. The designated press section released a solitary, brief chuckle. Subsequently, a television producer stationed in the rear of the room, currently employed by a broadcasting network that was widely expected to remain highly sympathetic toward Schiff, loudly muttered the phrase, "Oh my God," for everyone to hear. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row entirely refused to rotate her head to identify the speaker. Her facial expression had completely frozen into a mask of terror exactly 30 seconds prior. Kennedy presented his opponent with a brutal binary dilemma. He stated that either the politician knowingly committed massive mortgage fraud, an offense carrying a maximum 30-year federal sentence, or he was currently attempting to convince a live national television audience that a highly prestigious Harvard-educated attorney who successfully orchestrated the massive impeachment of an American president somehow fundamentally fails to comprehend the basic definition of the word primary. The heavy drawl casually intertwined its fingers. He demanded the senator select which horrific option he preferred. Schiff entirely failed to produce a single syllable in response. He completely refused to direct his gaze toward his communications director. He entirely avoided looking at the senator seated 3 chairs down from his position. He totally bypassed making eye contact with the designated press section. He stared exclusively at the manila folder resting upon the lower testimony bench. The folder was currently completely closed. It represented the absolute only physical object occupying the massive room that was not actively staring directly back at him in absolute horror. Obliterate that like button immediately, because exactly what you just witnessed was a rural Louisiana attorney aggressively crucifying a sitting United States senator using the complex federal mortgage code on live national television. Type the exact phrase "Bayou Bookkeeper" into the comments section if you have ever witnessed a cornered animal violently snap back at its attacker. Smash the subscribe icon because the upcoming explosive revelation possesses absolutely zero connection to real estate properties. The next bomb involves a highly controversial telephone conversation featuring an American president. The manila folder was smoothly pushed toward the absolute edge of the wooden bench. A stark red document folder immediately materialized to take its place. Kennedy casually informed his opponent that he absolutely did not travel all the way northward from Louisiana simply to bicker about a residential property located in Maryland. He stated he arrived to aggressively confront the politician regarding highly specific events he publicly claimed to witness with his own eyes, subsequently denied seeing, then flipped back to claiming he witnessed, before ultimately claiming he couldn't have possibly known the truth. A tiny, subtle smile appeared upon the rural attorney's face. He casually informed his opponent he possessed exactly 3 additional folders waiting to be explored. When the red folder was finally cracked open, it released a highly faint, distinct aroma of aged leather. The identification label secured to the interior flap was written entirely utilizing Kennedy's personal handwriting. The label displayed exactly 3 letters alongside 6 numerical digits reading HPSCI 92619. Over in the designated press section, 3 separate journalists frantically jotted down the specific date. He informed the senator that on September 26, 2019, he operated as the absolute primary chairman overseeing the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He noted the politician officially initiated a massive public inquiry. He added a formal transcript was generated. He highlighted the massive televised coverage broadcasting the event. He quoted the politician explicitly declaring he possessed the actual transcript of the call right there in his hands. He noted the politician subsequently read precisely what he claimed represented the authentic conversation. The heavy drawl successfully relocated Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He demanded the politician recall exactly what he claimed the executive stated during that specific broadcast. There were precisely 2 additional, highly agonizing beats of mental preparation evident within Schiff's vocal delivery this time around. Absolutely anyone who had actively observed his committee performances over the previous 8 years would have easily recognized the subtle hesitation. They represented the exact specific beats that consistently materialized whenever Schiff perfectly recognized a devastating inquiry was incoming, fully comprehended the factual answer was horrific, and was desperately attempting to select the least damaging option from three highly rehearsed defensive responses currently bouncing around his skull. He addressed Senator Kennedy, arguing his introductory statement delivered on that specific afternoon was widely categorized at the time as a humorously exaggerated imitation. Kennedy aggressively tightened the heavy drawl by exactly a quarter step, merely enough for the entire press section to immediately notice the shift. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row, the exact same individual whose facial expression permanently froze exactly 30 seconds into the massive mortgage revelation, scrawled a single word into her notepad. The word was simply, "uh-oh." Kennedy brutally interrupted the defense, asking if the statement was categorized as a humorously exaggerated imitation exclusively after the politician was successfully caught in the massive deception. A tiny, highly visible flush of red coloration materialized upon Schiff's neck, situated immediately above his crisp shirt collar. The robotic C-SPAN broadcasting camera, originally programmed specifically to track microscopic skin temperature fluctuations for elite award show coverage rather than standard Senate inquiries, successfully captured the physical reaction anyway. The broadcast producer operating inside the C-SPAN mobile unit parked outside issued the command closer into his communication headset. 12 million American television screens instantly watched a single solitary bead of nervous perspiration slowly form, temporarily hold its position, and eventually break entirely loose from the side of Schiff's neck. The bead rolled exactly an inch-and-a-half downward before the fabric of his collar successfully absorbed the moisture. Schiff desperately attempted to continue his defense, stammering that the statement was explicitly categorized as such directly within the actual broadcasted monologue itself. He weakly argued he was merely attempting to illustrate a broader point regarding the executive's underlying intent rather than providing a perfect verbatim quotation. A single printed page was smoothly elevated from the lower testimony bench. Kennedy announced his intention to recite exactly what the politician broadcasted to the nation. He quoted the politician, claiming the executive stated he desired a specific favor before repeating the demand for emphasis. He took a calculated beat. He brutally pointed out that specific phrasing was supposed to represent Donald Trump actually speaking, mockingly labeling it a dramatic device. He continued quoting the politician, claiming the executive threatened to repeat the demand exactly 7 times and aggressively ordered the listener to pay close attention. He took a secondary, calculated beat. He hammered home that specific threat was also supposedly the president actually speaking, mockingly referring to it as the underlying substance of the call. He delivered the final quote, noting the politician claimed the executive explicitly demanded the foreign leader manufacture massive quantities of damaging opposition research targeting a domestic rival. The heavy drawl dropped to an incredibly quiet, menacing volume. The C-SPAN audio engineer immediately cranked the microphone gain upward yet another notch. He had successfully increased the volume exactly 3 times within a 20-minute span, representing 3 more adjustments than he had ever executed during any Senate judiciary inquiry throughout his entire 11-year professional career. He brutally reminded his opponent that he aggressively read those exact fabricated phrases directly into the permanent congressional archives on a live national television broadcast. He emphasized he executed this massive deception while occupying the highly trusted role of chairman overseeing the House Intelligence Committee and possessing elite top-secret security clearance. A tiny, distinct noise erupted from the designated press section. It was the exact same specific sound that completely failed to register as a genuine laugh or a shocked gasp. The journalist representing the Atlantic, situated in the 3rd row, was currently frantically writing directly onto his own lap. He entirely abandoned the facade of pretending to write onto his open notebook. Kennedy casually mentioned that this specific portion of the massive scandal always provided him with immense amusement. The heavy drawl metaphorically tipped its hat once more. He demanded the politician recall the exact date the authentic, verified transcript detailing the actual telephone conversation was officially declassified and released by the executive branch. A suffocating silence instantly consumed the massive room. He provided the devastating answer himself, stating it occurred on September 25, 2019. He brutally emphasized that specific date landed exactly 1 day prior to the politician reading his completely fabricated version directly into the permanent record. He allowed exactly 2 agonizing beats to pass. He hammered home the reality that the politician physically possessed the authentic document. He noted the verified transcript was literally resting upon his desk. He accused him of intentionally choosing to broadcast an entirely different fabricated version aloud purely on purpose. This specific moment marked the precise juncture where the senator seated exactly 3 chairs away from Schiff, the exact individual who previously studied the acoustic ceiling tiles, finally surrendered entirely and directed his gaze squarely toward his personal cellular device. He was absolutely not actively utilizing the phone. He was simply staring deeply into the completely black, locked digital screen. He perfectly recognized it would appear incredibly inappropriate to actively scroll through social media while a legislative colleague was being aggressively eviscerated on live television. However, the dark, inactive screen of the locked device suddenly transformed into the absolute most fascinating object occupying the entire room that wasn't currently resting upon the lower testimony bench. Kennedy continued his relentless assault, noting that on June 21st, 2023, the United States House of Representatives successfully executed a formal public condemnation against him utilizing a narrow margin of 213 votes against 209. He recited a quote extracted directly from the official resolution, stating Representative Schiff intentionally deceived his investigative committee, the entire Congress, and the American population. He brutally reminded the politician that specific quote absolutely did not represent his own personal opinion. He emphasized it represented the official, permanent conclusion recorded by the United States House of Representatives. A tiny, menacing smile appeared upon the rural attorney's face. He bluntly informed his opponent he currently holds the shameful distinction of being merely the 25th elected lawmaker in American history to suffer this specific punishment. He repeated the incredibly exclusive tally of 25 individuals out of the tens of thousands who previously served. He mockingly congratulated the politician for occupying such an incredibly exclusive historical club. This specific moment triggered Adam Schiff to aggressively rise to his feet. He forcefully shoved his leather chair exactly 2 inches backward. He slammed both of his hands firmly onto the wooden table. The highly prestigious Harvard law graduate, the exact individual who successfully secured cum laude honors back in 1985, who previously clerked for a powerful federal judge, who served as a relentless assistant U.S. attorney operating in Los Angeles, and who personally secured the massive espionage conviction against a rogue FBI operative, finally awakened from his terrified paralysis. The elite California senator violently awakened. The primary impeachment manager, who once commanded a massive press conference hosted directly upon the floor of the United States Senate and arrogantly branded the afternoon as a massive turning point in American history, finally awakened as well. His vocal projection violently escalated. He aggressively addressed Senator Kennedy, loudly declaring the formal reprimand was entirely a massive political stunt. He violently jabbed his index finger directly into the wooden table 1 single time. The impact caused the premium-branded sparkling water bottle to noticeably vibrate. He claimed the entire spectacle was entirely orchestrated by Donald Trump's loyalists operating within the legislative chamber. He argued the punishment carried absolutely zero legitimate legal weight. He insisted it imposed absolutely zero tangible penalties. He noted that 20 conservative members initially voted to completely table the aggressive motion before Congresswoman Luna was forced to entirely strip out the proposed $16 million financial penalty merely to successfully secure enough votes to pass the measure. He firmly declared the action absolutely did not represent a legitimate legal verdict. He angrily branded the entire operation as massive political theater. The heavily progressive designated press section, which remained completely silent for 19 consecutive minutes, suddenly clapped exactly once. They immediately followed it with a secondary clap. Subsequently, a television producer stationed in the rear of the facility, whose massive media corporation had aggressively financed the privilege of broadcasting a highly sympathetic evening program dedicated entirely to Schiff for 6 consecutive years, aggressively rose to his feet and began clapping enthusiastically with both of his hands elevated high above his head. An unidentified individual loudly shouted the word yes in agreement. A youthful woman sporting a vintage Schiff campaign cap, who had been sitting paralyzed in the third row completely holding her breath since the massive Maryland housing revelation dropped, finally exhaled heavily and joined the applause. Schiff seized the momentum, loudly declaring that while they were actively discussing the concept of absolute accountability, they ought to thoroughly analyze exactly what Donald Trump genuinely executed during that highly controversial telephone conversation. He aggressively accused the former executive of heavily pressuring a foreign leader to completely manufacture damaging opposition research targeting a domestic political rival. He claimed the executive intentionally withheld crucial military assistance from an allied nation currently engaged in a violent conflict against Russia. He accused the former leader of totally betraying the nation's closest allies. He claimed he totally betrayed the dedicated intelligence community. He finalized the barrage by accusing the former executive of completely betraying the foundation of the Constitution itself. He proudly declared he completely stands by absolutely every single word contained within his original introductory statement. He stubbornly argued the underlying substance of his fabricated monologue was fundamentally accurate, regardless of whether the specific literary device deployed technically functioned as an exaggerated imitation. His vocal projection effortlessly carried his words entirely up toward the massive crystal chandeliers illuminating the room. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row silently mouthed the phrase, "That's the soundbite in real time." He aggressively challenged the conservative attorney, suggesting that if he arrived utilizing a formal Senate inquiry simply to aggressively relitigate the massive impeachment trial targeting an individual who suffered 2 separate impeachments, faced 4 distinct criminal indictments, and absorbed 34 massive felony convictions, then perhaps the rural accounting tactics currently dominating the room were functioning exactly where they belonged. The entire progressive section of the crowd immediately exploded onto their feet. The massive ovation consumed the room for 15 uninterrupted seconds. For those 15 seconds, the massive hearing chamber entirely belonged to Adam Schiff. The broadcasting producers operating inside the 3 massive mobile trucks parked outside the Hart Building instantly began clipping the explosive footage for immediate distribution. The youthful staffer operating in the rear of the room, possessing a prestigious master's degree focusing on political communications earned from Georgetown University, who personally practiced executing this exact specific rhetorical maneuver during elite graduate seminars, rapidly recorded the massive moment vertically utilizing her cellular device specifically for uploading to Instagram. A pair of Democratic senators occupying the elevated platform offered aggressive nods of approval. One of those specific individuals quietly muttered the politician's first name under his breath in rapid succession, perfectly mirroring the exact manner a boxing coach softly mutters the name of his fighter while watching him successfully dominate the 8th round on the official scorecards. Positioned directly across the massive room upon the lower testimony bench, Kennedy completely refused to launch any desperate verbal interruptions. He entirely refrained from making any aggressive physical gestures. He absolutely did not move a single muscle. He didn't even bother snapping the red document folder shut. He simply remained comfortably seated with his hands neatly folded resting atop the initial manila folder. He mirrored the exact posture a seasoned rural attorney adopts when he has successfully participated in enough brutal trials to perfectly comprehend that certain arrogant witnesses, when provided the opportunity, will inevitably resting the entire prosecutor's case completely on his behalf. The massive applause eventually crested. It reached its absolute peak volume. It inevitably began to slowly subside. Once the noise had successfully fallen far enough to allow the C-SPAN audio engineer to return the microphone gain back down toward its standard baseline setting, Kennedy finally spoke. The heavy drawl was completely absent. It didn't simply vanish into thin air. It was meticulously packed away, perfectly resembling the exact manner a gentleman carefully hangs his hat upon a hook positioned near the exit door, fully recognizing he will undoubtedly require its services again in a matter of minutes. The specific vocal delivery echoing from the microphone now belonged to a voice absolutely nobody currently occupying that massive hearing chamber had previously encountered. Schiff had never heard it. Schiff's communications director had never heard it. The individual sitting on the elevated platform had never heard it. The Atlantic journalist seated in the third row, who personally covered Kennedy during a massive profile assignment 3 years prior and officially concluded in print that the thick Louisiana drawl was almost certainly a manufactured performance, had absolutely never heard it. The specific voice that suddenly arrived belonged exclusively to John Neely Kennedy. It was the precise voice of a man who successfully earned a Juris Doctor from the prestigious University of Virginia School of Law while securing elite magna cum laude honors back in 1977. It was the exact voice of an individual who successfully acquired a highly coveted postgraduate diploma focusing on law and government from the elite Magdalen College located within Oxford University during 1973. It was the authoritative voice of the official Louisiana State Treasurer who successfully dominated the position from 2000 all the way through 2017. The vocal delivery was as incredibly precise as a federal courtroom litigator. The heavy regional accent hadn't simply vanished. The heavy accent had been temporarily hung upon a hook. He formally addressed Senator Schiff utilizing the elite polished delivery. Deep inside Schiff's skull, buried completely beneath the rapid mental Rolodex cycling through highly prepared rebuttals and extensively rehearsed sound bites, a tiny, terrifying new calculation initiated. He absolutely failed to run this specific calculation during his flight from LAX while riding in the Lincoln Town Car or while waiting inside the green room. The devastating realization was incredibly simple. He recognized the rural attorney meticulously prepared for this specific confrontation. He fully comprehended his opponent aggressively planned this exact response the previous evening. The pristine Oxford vocal delivery relentlessly continued its assault. He recited Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution, noting it explicitly grants each individual legislative chamber the absolute authority to aggressively punish its own members for executing disorderly conduct. He firmly stated the formal public reprimand of an actively sitting member represents one of merely 3 official disciplinary mechanisms legally available to the legislative chamber. He listed the 3 options as formal public reprimand, severe censure, and total expulsion from the body. He aggressively rejected the politician's claim that the punishment was mere theater, branding it instead as a highly severe form of authentic constitutional discipline. He reiterated the final vote tally rested at 213 against 209. He emphasized the massive resolution remains permanently cemented onto the official record of the United States House of Representatives. He hammered home that the document explicitly utilizes the specific word purposely. He repeated the devastating phrase purposely deceived. He deployed a highly calculated pause lasting exactly 1 beat. He brutally informed the politician that the specific phrase absolutely does not represent a mere literary device. He declared it represents an official, undeniable finding of fact. The heavy rural drawl slowly began to return to his vocal delivery, mirroring the exact motion of a gentleman slowly placing a hat back onto his head. The pristine Oxford voice quietly slipped out the exit door while the familiar Madisonville inflection strolled confidently back into the room. He casually informed his opponent he possessed the absolute right to brand the punishment as highly political. He noted he was entirely free to label the massive humiliation as mere theater or absolutely anything else he desperately desired to call it. He brutally declared the singular action the senator was completely forbidden from executing was arrogantly reading an entirely fabricated transcript detailing a presidential communication directly into the permanent congressional record on live national television, successfully absorbing a severe public reprimand executed by the United States House for the massive deception, and subsequently sitting comfortably inside a Senate hearing 4 years later attempting to convince a rural attorney originating from Louisiana that the massive constitutional punishment somehow doesn't actually matter. His intense gaze successfully locked onto Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He firmly declared the punishment absolutely matters. He emphasized it mattered immensely when it originally occurred. He insisted it continues to matter right now. He brutally promised the politician it will absolutely matter when the future historical scholars eventually sit down to document exactly what specific category of investigative chairman he genuinely represented. The massive applause completely vanished from the room. The heavily progressive section of the crowd had entirely returned to their seats at some unidentified point during the previous 40 seconds. Absolutely none of those individuals possessed any conscious memory of actively executing the physical motion. The youthful Schiff staffer possessing the prestigious Georgetown master's degree entirely ceased recording the confrontation. The television producer stationed in the rear of the facility rotated his body to address a nearby colleague, inquiring in a highly hushed tone whether the individual had successfully reviewed the recently declassified testimony provided by Atkinson. Exactly 15 agonizing seconds had passed. Schiff had successfully secured a massive victory lasting precisely 15 seconds. He had subsequently absorbed a catastrophic defeat spanning the following 90 seconds. Type the exact phrase "possum" bit back down into the comment section if you have ever previously witnessed a conservative senator originating from Louisiana aggressively drop a pristine Harvard Law accent directly onto the head of an arrogant Harvard Law graduate. Smash the subscribe icon because the upcoming explosive revelation focuses entirely upon a highly secretive telephone conversation Schiff executed prior to launching the massive impeachment effort, contacting a specific individual he previously swore he absolutely didn't even know, all while aggressively lying about the interaction on national television. The stark red document folder was firmly snapped shut. It produced the exact same tiny definitive noise against the wooden surface as the initial manila file generated. Two complete folders were now neatly stacked together. Two massive folders remained waiting. A dark navy document file abruptly materialized upon the wooden bench. This specific navy folder possessed significantly more physical thickness than either of the previous two examples. Absolutely any journalist sitting within the designated press section who had invested more than a single year actively covering Schiff's political career instantly knew exactly what specific devastating information was contained inside merely by observing the sheer bulk of the file. The Atlantic journalist seated within the third row, who previously operated as a highly vocal early defender of the massive 2019 impeachment effort, gently placed his writing instrument completely down onto his open notebook. He entirely refused to pick the pen back up for the subsequent 11 minutes. Kennedy addressed the senator, asking if he clearly remembered an individual named Mr. Michael Atkinson. Schiff had physically collapsed back down into his leather chair at some point during the devastating Oxford vocal interlude. His right hand had desperately retreated directly back toward the lapel pin, mirroring the exact motion a terrified man's hand utilizes to blindly search for a stabilizing railing while navigating a pitch-black corridor he is completely unfamiliar with. The jewelry remained technically centered upon his lapel, but as the robotic C-SPAN broadcasting feed had quietly documented throughout the previous 4 minutes, it absolutely no longer rested perfectly vertical. It had noticeably slipped roughly 2 degrees away from a straight vertical alignment. Schiff nervously answered Senator Kennedy, confirming the individual functioned as the Inspector General. He rapidly added a desperate attempt to frame the narrative, emphasizing the man was officially appointed by the Obama administration. Kennedy smoothly agreed with the assessment, noting he genuinely remembered the individual. He stated his intention to absolutely guarantee the everyday citizens tuning in from their living rooms also successfully remembered the individual's political leanings. He casually remarked that the upcoming devastating narrative functions significantly better when the audience perfectly comprehends exactly which specific political faction originally appointed Mr. Atkinson to his powerful position. The heavy drawl finally cracked the thick folder open. He noted Mr. Atkinson officially received a highly sensitive whistleblower complaint on August 12, 2019. He explained the massive complaint focused entirely upon a highly controversial telephone communication occurring between President Trump and the sitting president representing Ukraine. He highlighted the actual communication occurred on July 25th. He emphasized the massive complaint was formally filed exactly 18 days following the event. He identified the individual who filed the complaint as an active CIA intelligence analyst whose actual identity had completely blanketed the public record for 5 consecutive years by this point. His intense gaze successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He demanded the senator answer a highly specific inquiry. He asked if, prior to the whistleblower formally submitting his massive complaint to Mr. Atkinson, and prior to the individual completing the official government paperwork strictly signed under the severe penalty of perjury, the individual did or did not possess any form of prior contact alongside members of his dedicated administrative staff. Schiff desperately attempted to dodge the inquiry, aggressively noting the whistleblower's actual identity remains permanently protected by stringent federal statutes. Kennedy aggressively interrupted the pathetic deflection, noting he absolutely never requested the individual's actual name. The heavy drawl remained incredibly patient, perfectly mimicking the exact demeanor a seasoned physician utilizes when dealing with a frantic patient attempting to prematurely flee an examination room. He repeated the core inquiry, firmly asking if the individual conversed with his administrative staff prior to officially filing the massive document. Schiff nervously shifted his gaze directly toward his communications director. The communications director, Sarah Lynn, the exact individual who previously dropped her cellular device onto the floorboards, was currently staring deeply into her phone once more. The digital screen was currently facing entirely upward this time around. She was actively scrolling through digital information. She was absolutely not scrolling for personal entertainment. She was frantically scrolling in a desperate search for a viable defensive strategy that simply wasn't materializing. Schiff finally offered a highly sanitized defensive response to Senator Kennedy. He claimed his dedicated committee staff merely received a highly routine standard inquiry originating from an individual possessing generalized concerns regarding a potential issue perfectly suited for the Inspector General to investigate. He stubbornly insisted they flawlessly adhered to absolutely all mandated operational protocols. Kennedy mockingly repeated the specific word routine. He deployed a highly calculated pause designed to apply maximum pressure. He demanded to know exactly how routine it was that a mere 2 weeks prior to the massive complaint being officially filed, or more accurately, the exact day following the highly controversial Trump-Zelensky telephone communication, his dedicated committee aggressively hired a specific individual named Sean Misko. The massive hearing room, which was already resting in a state of terrified quietness, suddenly transitioned into something fundamentally quieter than absolute silence. Over in the peripheral wings, Sarah Lynn entirely ceased scrolling through her cellular device. She firmly placed the phone completely down onto the wooden railing. She entirely refused to pick the device back up for the remainder of the massive hearing. Kennedy continued his brutal assault, noting Mr. Misko, according to extensive public records successfully published by the Washington Examiner publication, previously operated as a dedicated National Security Council aide. He highlighted the man actively worked at the elite NSC during the entirety of the Obama administration. He brutally emphasized he actively worked there directly alongside the exact same individual who subsequently filed the massive whistleblower complaint. He stated they operated as professional colleagues. He noted several individuals who actively worked alongside the duo openly described their relationship as incredibly close. He quoted one former elite White House official who explicitly utilized the highly specific term bro-like to characterize their bond. A tiny, subtle smile appeared upon the rural attorney's face. It was completely devoid of cruelty and entirely lacked genuine kindness. It simply appeared incredibly exhausted. He brutally reminded the politician he successfully hired Mr. Misko on July 26, 2019. He reiterated the highly controversial Trump-Zelensky telephone communication occurred precisely on July 25th. He hammered home the devastating reality that those two massive events were separated by a single, solitary day. He emphasized that the exact individual the politician aggressively hired on day 2 just so happened to be the former residential roommate of the exact same man who subsequently filed the massive complaint that successfully triggered the unprecedented impeachment effort targeting the sitting president of the United States. The heavy drawl successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes one final time. He mockingly noted that specific timeline represents quite an incredible coincidence. Schiff frantically attempted to defend the hiring decision. He nervously sputtered to Senator Kennedy that Mr. Misko represents a highly qualified national security professional possessing extensive experience. Kennedy immediately interrupted the pathetic defense. He brutally added that the man also represents the exact same individual who, according to two former elite White House officials speaking entirely on the official record to Real Clear Investigations, was audibly overheard inside the West Wing during February of 2017, a mere 2 weeks following President Trump officially assuming executive office, aggressively discussing exactly how to successfully take out the sitting president. He repeated the staggering timeline of merely 2 weeks into the administration. He emphasized that highly explosive story had permanently resided upon the public record for numerous years. He deployed a highly calculated, aggressive pause. He casually asked the senator if he had ever bothered reading the massive report. He deployed a secondary, slightly tighter pause to maximize the pressure. Schiff desperately attempted to discredit the publication. He aggressively argued the massive report remains completely unverified. He claimed Real Clear Investigations represents the exact same media outlet that initially broke the highly controversial Hunter Biden laptop authentication story. Kennedy immediately crushed the weak deflection, noting the publication absolutely does not operate as a sensationalized tabloid like the National Enquirer. He hammered home the reality that two elite White House officials formally spoke on the permanent record regarding an individual the politician successfully hired a single day following the controversial call he subsequently flagged for investigation. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row was absolutely no longer capable of keeping her facial expression completely still. She was currently visibly grimacing in sheer agony. Exactly 3 rows directly behind her position, a television producer representing a highly popular digital podcast that dedicated 4 consecutive years to aggressively branding Schiff as the ultimate conscience of the Constitution, quietly whispered to a nearby colleague that he was unfortunately going to be forced to contact the program's host later that exact afternoon. Kennedy casually mentioned that this specific portion of the massive scandal consistently caused him immense confusion. The heavy drawl smoothly extracted a 4th printed photocopy from the thick file. He informed the politician that on September 17, 2019, he participated in a live national television broadcast. He specified the appearance occurred on the MSNBC network. He noted the anchor directly asked him whether his dedicated investigative committee possessed any form of direct contact alongside the massive whistleblower. He quoted the politician's exact response, noting the footage remains permanently available on digital tape for absolutely anyone to easily review. He quoted the man claiming they absolutely had not spoken directly alongside the whistleblower, adding they desperately desired to do so. He deployed a highly calculated pause. He noted that specific broadcast occurred on a Tuesday. He deployed a significantly longer pause to build intense anticipation. He brutally revealed that precisely 2 weeks later, exactly on October 2nd, the New York Times published a massive investigative report. He explicitly emphasized the report absolutely did not originate from the Fox News network. He stated the New York Times successfully exposed the massive reality that the whistleblower had absolutely maintained direct contact alongside his dedicated administrative staff prior to officially filing the massive complaint. He noted the politician's administrative office subsequently issued a formal statement reluctantly acknowledging that specific illicit contact. He presented the politician with another brutal binary dilemma. He stated that either the man remained completely oblivious regarding exactly what his own dedicated administrative staff was actively executing behind his back, or he willingly appeared on a live national television broadcast and intentionally lied directly to the American population. A tiny, highly expressive shrug accompanied the heavy drawl, appearing almost genuinely regretful regarding the devastating options. He bluntly instructed his opponent to select one of the horrific choices. Schiff's hand, the exact same hand currently gripping the lapel pin, was visibly squeezing the jewelry with significantly more intensity now. The tiny pin had noticeably slipped from resting 2 degrees off vertical to a highly visible 4 degrees off vertical. The massive deviation was completely unnoticeable from the elevated platform. However, it was incredibly obvious upon the massive C-SPAN broadcasting feed. The broadcast producer operating inside the C-SPAN mobile unit parked outside issued the command pin directly into his communication headset. The broadcasting camera instantly switched to provide a brief, massive close-up shot focused entirely upon the damaged pin. The shiny jewelry caught the intense studio lighting in a manner it absolutely had not reflected at Minute 4. Schiff desperately attempted to defend the massive deception. He nervously sputtered to Senator Kennedy that the illicit contact occurring between his dedicated staff and the massive complainant was entirely procedural in nature and remained completely consistent with standard operations. Kennedy aggressively interrupted the pathetic excuse. He noted Mr. Atkinson formally provided sworn testimony before his dedicated investigative committee on October 4, 2019. The heavy drawl dropped significantly lower in volume. He emphasized the testimony was delivered entirely under the severe penalty of perjury. He stated the official confirmed the massive whistleblower entirely failed to disclose upon the official government complaint form that he had previously contacted members of his dedicated staff. He emphasized the required form explicitly demands the absolute disclosure of any other actions you have taken regarding your massive disclosure, demanding the information under the severe penalty of perjury. He quoted Mr. Atkinson's exact words, extracting the text directly from the politician's own official committee transcript. He quoted the official, stating that had they genuinely possessed prior knowledge regarding the illicit contact, it absolutely would have represented an entirely additional matter requiring their immediate investigative review. His intense gaze successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He brutally reminded the politician that specific quote absolutely did not originate from Devin Nunes aggressively deploying conservative talking points. He emphasized the quote absolutely did not originate from Donald Trump's social media. He hammered home that the devastating quote originated directly from an Obama-appointed official explicitly informing his dedicated committee that massive portions of the narrative simply didn't add up factually. He deployed a highly calculated, heavy pause. He casually mentioned that this specific portion is the exact detail he constantly finds himself analyzing. The heavy voice dropped an entirely additional half-step in volume. The C-SPAN audio engineer immediately cranked the microphone gain upward for an unprecedented fourth time that exact morning. He brutally summarized the entire massive disaster. He noted the massive whistleblower complaint that successfully triggered the unprecedented removal effort targeting a sitting president of the United States, representing the exact foundational document that successfully launched a massive, exhaustive Senate trial, entirely dominated 3 consecutive months of endless media coverage, and completely consumed the absolute entirety of the American political bandwidth during the autumn of 2019, was constructed entirely upon secondary hearsay. He stated Mr. Atkinson explicitly confirmed this massive reality under a sworn oath. He emphasized the massive whistleblower was absolutely not actively participating on the actual telephone communication. He noted the individual completely failed to physically hear the conversation occur. He explained the individual merely reviewed a summarized readout of the event. He added the individual conversed with other individuals who had also merely reviewed a summarized readout. He noted the individual subsequently conversed directly alongside his dedicated staff. He finalized the devastating timeline by noting the individual formally filed a massive complaint while intentionally hiding the fact he previously conversed with his staff. He deployed a highly calculated beat. He brutally revealed that an astonishing 16 out of the 18 massive impeachment witnesses his dedicated committee formally called to testify provided entirely hearsay-based testimony. He repeated the staggering ratio of 16 out of 18 for maximum emphasis. He noted the remaining 2 individuals who managed to avoid delivering hearsay testimony were completely incapable of establishing the central foundational allegation driving the entire effort. He hammered home that the authentic, verified transcript detailing the actual telephone communication, once it was successfully declassified by the executive branch, completely failed to contain the aggressive demands the massive whistleblower claimed existed. He stated the document accurately reflected exactly what was said. He noted the President of the United States personally declassified the massive document entirely on his own authority. He emphasized absolutely anyone possessed the ability to read the text. He brutally added that absolutely anyone who actually bothered to read the text immediately discovered the highly aggressive phrases he actively read aloud on live television on September 26th were entirely absent from the actual conversation. Deep inside Schiff's skull, securely hidden behind the rapidly failing mental Rolodex, desperately cycling through prepared rebuttals that fundamentally failed to address the devastating inquiries currently being launched, an entirely secondary calculation quietly initiated. The initial calculation, executed while cruising over Nebraska, focused entirely upon complex statutes of limitations. This specific calculation was significantly simpler in nature. He recognized his opponent possessed absolute access to every single detail. He realized the rural attorney possessed a complete record of absolutely everything he had ever uttered publicly. He acknowledged the man possessed the entire massive timeline. He briefly parted his lips to mount a defense, immediately shut them, and then parted them once more. He desperately attempted to deflect the massive damage. He weakly argued the highly sensitive testimony provided by Atkinson was currently undergoing a severe mischaracterization. Kennedy immediately demanded to know exactly who was supposedly executing this massive mischaracterization. The heavy drawl was incredibly light and highly conversational. It perfectly mimicked the exact vocal tone a gentleman utilizes when politely asking his neighbor if he desires assistance transporting groceries from his vehicle. A pair of journalists seated within the second row immediately jotted down the exact same singular word into their notepads. The specific word recorded was whom. He rapidly listed off the potential culprits. He asked if the massive mischaracterization was executed by the prestigious New York Times publication. He asked if it was executed by Mr. Atkinson himself. He asked if it was executed by the Washington Examiner publication. He asked if it was executed by the two former elite White House officials. He finally asked if it was being executed directly by him. A tiny, incredibly exhausted smile appeared upon the rural attorney's face. He brutally informed the politician that absolutely someone operating within this massive scenario is actively mischaracterizing reality, and he firmly promised it absolutely isn't the Inspector General. He deployed a highly calculated pause. The heavy drawl suddenly executed a vocal maneuver it entirely avoided utilizing throughout the entire massive morning. It violently dropped one complete vocal register. The folksy charm remained partially intact. The authentic Madisonville inflection remained highly prominent. However, the polite, respectful veneer he previously maintained had completely evaporated. The specific vocal delivery that suddenly arrived belonged exclusively to a man who successfully invested exactly 43 minutes treating Adam Schiff exactly like a respected legislative colleague, and had ultimately decided, somewhere occupying the space separating Sean Misko's highly suspicious hiring date and the disastrous September 17th MSNBC broadcast tape, that he was absolutely finished maintaining that polite facade. He addressed the senator utilizing the aggressive new tone. He announced his intention to explicitly vocalize exactly what he suspected the politician desperately desired him to avoid saying. He brutally declared his absolute belief that the politician aggressively lied to the public. He stated his belief that the man intentionally lied directly to a massive national television audience on September 17, 2019. He added his belief that the man intentionally lied when he actively read an entirely fabricated transcript directly into the permanent congressional archives on September 26th. He accused the politician of aggressively lying for 4 consecutive years to absolutely any journalist willing to shove a microphone directly into his face. He finalized the devastating barrage by declaring his absolute belief that the politician perfectly recognized he was actively lying throughout the entire massive deception. He casually offered the politician the opportunity to formally object to his aggressive framing of the narrative. He noted he was entirely free to brand the accusation as massively partisan. He stated he possessed the right to order his dedicated communications director to blast out a defensive press release immediately following the massive hearing, desperately branding his actions as a massive right-wing distraction. He firmly stated the everyday American citizens actively watching the confrontation unfold upon their personal televisions currently residing at home represent the exact individuals whose hard-earned tax dollars successfully financed the massive $32 million investigation birthed directly from his massive lies. He argued those exact citizens are absolutely entitled to finally hear a single individual, just one single time on a live national broadcast, explicitly utilize the precise word aloud. He deployed a highly calculated, heavy drawl beat. He bluntly informed the senator he aggressively lied to the domestic population for numerous years. The massive hearing chamber completely ceased any physical movement. Sarah Lynn, stationed in the peripheral wings, was currently pressing her hand forcefully over her mouth in sheer horror. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row was currently staring deeply at her own footwear. A pair of senators occupying the elevated platform had completely ceased breathing audibly. The C-SPAN audio engineer parked outside. Inside, the mobile unit slowly leaned back into his comfortable chair and quietly muttered the name Jesus directly into his ceramic coffee mug. Schiff completely failed to offer any sort of verbal response. The designated press section entirely refrained from laughing at the aggressive accusation. They had successfully finished laughing exactly 40 minutes prior. The MSNBC journalist, the exact same individual who successfully occupied a seat inside this identical hearing chamber 6 years prior during the massive Trump impeachment inquiry, invested that entire previous hearing frantically scribbling extensive notes perfectly mirroring the exact dedication an apostle utilizes to document religious scripture. Today, she was absolutely not taking any notes whatsoever. Her hands rested limply inside her lap. Her face remained permanently pointed directly toward the floorboards resting roughly 3 feet directly in front of her shoes. Something fundamental had completely shifted within the massive room, and absolutely nobody had bothered to inform the designated press corps. This specific realization represented exactly what the Atlantic journalist seated in the third row was rapidly beginning to comprehend in real time. He experienced a highly specific, sickening sensation he would later accurately describe to a close friend over evening cocktails as perfectly mirroring the exact feeling of suddenly discovering the trusted local priest was actually the notorious neighborhood thief. The press corps had been repeatedly warned regarding the massive deception. The press corps had been aggressively warned for 4 consecutive years. A significant portion of those journalists simply consciously elected to completely ignore the warnings. If you are actively streaming this explosive video and have absolutely yet to successfully subscribe to the channel, you are on the verge of missing the exact moment a rural attorney physically hauls the infamous Steele dossier directly into a massive Senate hearing chamber. You are about to witness him aggressively command Adam Schiff to remain completely seated, while 3 specific individuals whose lives he actively helped obliterate slowly march directly up to the primary witness microphone. Type the exact phrase 3 witnesses down into the comments section immediately if you desperately want to observe this massive confrontation. Ensure you hit subscribe and absolutely do not navigate away from the video. The thick navy document folder was firmly snapped shut. Exactly 3 massive folders remained neatly stacked upon the lower testimony bench. Exactly 1 massive file remained waiting to be explored. A pitch-black document folder abruptly materialized upon the wooden surface. The dark folder completely failed to open right away. For the very first instance in exactly 51 agonizing minutes, the lower testimony bench remained perfectly still. Kennedy completely refused to elevate the protective cover. He absolutely did not extract a single printed page from the file. He simply stared deeply at the dark folder. He slowly shifted his gaze directly toward Schiff. He cast an incredibly brief, highly calculated glance directly toward the absolute rear of the massive hearing chamber. The broadcasting lenses remained permanently locked upon the elevated platform throughout the entire massive morning. They absolutely had not yet successfully located the specific third seating row situated near the absolute back on the far left seat. Exactly 3 unidentified men had been quietly occupying those specific seats since precisely 8:45 in the morning. The Atlantic journalist seated within the second row successfully walked directly past those 3 specific men while entering the facility and completely failed to consciously register their presence. A pair of those men were casually gripping ceramic coffee mugs. One specific individual was actively reviewing a printed copy of the Wall Street Journal publication. Absolutely none of those individuals sported official press credentials. Absolutely none of those individuals wore official witness identification pins. The conservative chairman hailing from Iowa was secretly briefed regarding their highly anticipated arrival precisely at 6:45 that exact morning. Absolutely nobody else currently occupying the massive room possessed any knowledge regarding their presence. Senator Kennedy finally broke the suffocating silence. The heavy drawl remained incredibly steady. It entirely lacked the folksy charm. It entirely lacked the pristine Oxford polish. It represented something occupying the highly intimidating space separating the two extremes. It was the exact authoritative voice of an elite litigator who has successfully reached the specific phase of the massive trial where he absolutely no longer requires any theatrical performance to secure victory. He informed the politician that on March 20th, 2017, he successfully operated as the ranking minority member representing the House Intelligence Committee. He noted the politician aggressively delivered a highly publicized opening monologue during a massive public inquiry. He emphasized the massive hearing was aggressively televised globally. He highlighted that tens of millions of everyday American citizens actively watched the massive broadcast. He brutally reminded the senator that during his aggressive introductory monologue, he explicitly read aloud directly into the permanent official congressional archives of the United States numerous highly specific, damning allegations extracted directly from a highly controversial document officially known as the Steele dossier. The dark black folder finally cracked open to reveal the paperwork. Resting perfectly on top of the pile inside the file was a singular photographic print. It represented a massive 8x10 enlarged replica displaying a single solitary page extracted directly from the highly controversial dossier. The specific page featured numerous blacked-out redactions scattered across the text. The dark redactions appeared incredibly aged. The massive dossier itself represented a significantly older piece of intelligence. He demanded the senator recall successfully reading those massive, damning allegations aloud. Senator Schiff nervously stammered a weak defense. He desperately argued the massive dossier represented a highly prevalent topic dominating public discourse during that specific time frame. Kennedy aggressively interrupted the pathetic excuse. He firmly agreed the document certainly represented a massive topic of conversation. He brutally highlighted the massive fundamental difference separating a mere conversational topic from authentic, undeniable evidence. He accused his opponent of aggressively marketing those entirely unverified allegations directly as concrete evidence. He quoted the politician explicitly claiming on national television, specifically upon the ABC News Network during March of 2017, that he possessed significantly more than mere circumstantial evidence proving illicit collusion, finalizing the direct citation. The heavy drawl successfully produced a secondary photographic print from the file. This specific image represented a digital screenshot perfectly captured from a live television broadcast interview. Schiff was prominently featured inside the frame, frozen mid-sentence with his mouth resting slightly agape. Kennedy brutally listed the various networks the politician utilized to broadcast the massive lie. He noted he aggressively peddled the claim upon the CNN network. He noted he aggressively peddled the claim upon the MSNBC network. He noted he aggressively peddled the claim during an exclusive event hosted by the Aspen Institute. He noted he aggressively peddled the claim while appearing on Meet the Press. He hammered home that he aggressively peddled the identical claim for 2.5 consecutive years. He noted he exclusively relied upon the exact same repetitive phrase claiming he possessed more than circumstantial proof. The heavy drawl slowly elevated its gaze to stare directly at the cornered politician. He bluntly demanded to know if the senator successfully produced that massive evidence at any point in his career. He explicitly utilized the term son to maximize the condescension. The entire massive facility plunged by terrifying degrees into something significantly deeper than absolute silence. The designated press section remained frozen as a solid row of entirely unmoving heads. The elevated platform remained frozen as a solid row of entirely unmoving heads. The broadcasting producers operating inside the massive cable trucks parked outside the Hart Building completely ceased transmitting any directional commands toward their highly skilled camera operators. The C-SPAN audio engineer physically leaned aggressively forward in his comfortable chair, firmly gripping both hands onto his massive audio console, actively listening to the devastating exchange utilizing his entire face. He mirrored the exact specific intensity an individual utilizes when listening to a harrowing deathbed confession. Kennedy aggressively repeated the devastating inquiry. He demanded to know if, anywhere across the massive globe occupying any formal hearing, participating in any sworn legal deposition, attending any highly classified intelligence briefing, or contributing to any massive committee report, he ever successfully produced the massive evidence he spent 2.5 years loudly claiming existed on national television. Senator Schiff frantically attempted to launch a desperate defense. He weakly stammered that the massive Mueller investigation somehow validated his claims. Kennedy immediately interrupted the pathetic deflection. He brutally noted the massive Mueller investigation officially concluded absolutely zero criminal conspiracy existed. The heavy drawl dropped even lower in volume. The C-SPAN audio gain was currently maxed out entirely, completely incapable of boosting the signal any further. He hammered home the staggering $32 million the massive inquiry successfully drained from the American taxpayer. He highlighted the 2.5 agonizing years dominating relentless news cycles. He explicitly quoted the official written conclusion authored by special counsel Robert Mueller. He emphasized the man functioned as a highly respected Republican official. He noted he previously served as a dedicated FBI director officially appointed by a conservative president. He recited the devastating conclusion, stating the massive investigation absolutely did not establish any formal coordination or illicit conspiracy. He deployed a highly calculated, heavy drawl beat. He aggressively pivoted toward Mr. Horowitz, specifically identifying him as the Department of Justice Inspector General. He highlighted the man functioned as another highly respected, strictly nonpartisan figure. He noted the official successfully published a massive investigative report during December of 2019. He brutally revealed the report explicitly identified 17 highly significant errors alongside massive material omissions buried within the highly secretive FISA applications utilized to aggressively surveil an individual named Carter Page. He hammered home the devastating reality that those exact specific FISA applications relied almost entirely upon the highly controversial Steele dossier. He emphasized the official provided sworn testimony, securely cemented onto the permanent public record, confirming the Federal Bureau successfully terminated Christopher Steele as a confidential intelligence source specifically for aggressively lying prior to successfully securing the massive FISA renewals. He brutally added that absolutely nobody bothered to inform the secretive FISA court regarding his termination. His intense gaze successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He aggressively pivoted toward Mr. Durham, specifically identifying him as Special Counsel John Durham. He noted the official successfully published his massive final report during May of 2023. He brutally revealed the report explicitly concluded the Federal Bureau possessed absolutely zero proper legal justification required to launch the massive Crossfire Hurricane investigation in the first place. He repeated the word none for maximum devastating emphasis. He explicitly quoted the official's exact words, stating the massive dossier was entirely unverified and fundamentally unreliable. He noted the primary intelligence subsource fueling the massive document, an individual identified as Igor Danchenko, eventually faced formal federal criminal charges specifically for aggressively lying directly to federal investigators. A single solitary typed sheet of paper was smoothly extracted from the dark folder. The heavy drawl hoisted the document high into the air for maximum visibility. He identified the paper as the Politicians Dedicated Committee's formal Democratic memorandum officially published on February 24, 2018. He noted the politician operated as the absolute senior Democratic authority overseeing the massive document. He announced his intention to recite the text at an agonizingly slow pace simply because he desperately wanted absolutely every single American citizen currently tuning into the broadcast to hear the massive deception. He quoted the massive memo claiming elite FBI alongside DOJ officials absolutely did not abuse the highly secretive FISA process, absolutely did not omit crucial material information, and absolutely did not subvert the highly vital surveillance tool simply to spy upon the Trump political campaign. He brutally highlighted the politician deployed exactly 3 highly aggressive negative assertions within the document. He accused his opponent of personally drafting the text. He accused him of formally signing the massive document. He accused him of aggressively releasing the massive deception directly to the compliant press corps. His intense gaze remained permanently locked upon Schiff's terrified face. He brutally noted that precisely 22 months later, Mr. Horowitz successfully published the devastating IG report exposing the 17 highly significant errors, the massive material omissions, and the systemic procedural failures. He stated the Federal Bureau absolutely subverted the massive surveillance process. He emphasized the respected Inspector General explicitly confirmed the massive deception in writing, buried within a staggering 600-page exhaustive report, completely overflowing with highly detailed footnotes. He deployed another highly calculated pause to let the reality crush the room. He addressed the senator directly, asking if during those specific 22 agonizing months, or perhaps spanning the subsequent 4 entire years following the massive revelation, he ever successfully issued a formal correction to the massive record. He asked if he successfully published an amended memorandum. He asked if he formally issued a public retraction. He asked if he ever managed to draft a single simple sentence formally acknowledging the devastating IG report completely contradicted his highly publicized claims. Senator Schiff frantically attempted to launch a desperate defense. He weakly sputtered that the massive issues highlighted by Mr. Horowitz were successfully addressed during subsequent operational reforms. Kennedy immediately interrupted the pathetic excuse. He brutally translated the frantic word salad, firmly declaring the response represented an absolute no. The typed sheet of paper was gently placed back down onto the wooden bench. The dark black folder was firmly snapped shut. Deep inside Schiff's skull, an entirely tertiary calculation quietly initiated. The initial calculation focused entirely upon Nebraska and statutes of limitations. The secondary calculation focused entirely upon exactly how much devastating ammunition Kennedy actively possessed. The tertiary calculation was significantly simpler than the previous 2 combined. It was actually significantly simpler than the initial 2 calculations added together. The horrifying realization simply stated this is officially over. The devastating thought absolutely did not arrive disguised as frantic panic. It absolutely did not arrive disguised as intense anger. It simply arrived disguised as an undeniable, cold, hard fact securely resting upon the interior lining of his skull. It perfectly mirrored the exact manner a devastating guilty verdict securely rests upon the interior lining of a heavy courtroom door immediately prior to the jury foreman successfully reading the document aloud. He had successfully reached the exact specific location within a massive 53-minute public hearing that absolutely every single prosecuting attorney inevitably reaches exactly once or twice throughout an entire lengthy career. He reached the exact terrifying location where the complex legal mathematics dictating the core facts of the specific case completely cease mattering entirely. The brutal mathematics dictating basic professional survival officially transform into the absolute only calculations remaining. He perfectly recognized exactly what he was fundamentally required to execute at that specific moment. He was fundamentally required to successfully hold his defensive ground. He was fundamentally required to aggressively deliver his highly rehearsed closing soundbite. He was fundamentally required to successfully strut out of the massive facility with his chin proudly elevated. He functioned as a highly prestigious Harvard-trained litigator. He perfectly understood exactly how to successfully absorb a massive defeat with grace. Exactly what he completely failed to understand, exactly what absolutely nobody currently occupying the massive room except for Kennedy genuinely knew, and exactly what Kennedy was rapidly preparing to aggressively deliver, was the horrifying reality that the massive defeat was absolutely not finished inflicting damage. Kennedy formally addressed the committee chairman. He politely requested formal permission to successfully invite exactly 3 specific observers to briefly address the massive committee. The conservative chairman, hailing from Iowa, who had been actively enjoying the entire massive spectacle since exactly minute 6 of the broadcast, offered a highly enthusiastic nod of approval. He formally declared the chair successfully recognized the highly anticipated witnesses located within the third row, counting from the absolute back, situated on the far left seat. Exactly 3 unidentified men slowly rose to their feet. The massive broadcasting cameras instantly located their position. Exactly 11 entirely distinct broadcasting feeds spanning 3 massive cable mobile units, 2 highly advanced C-SPAN robotic units, 1 dedicated MSNBC stationary camera, and approximately 470 cellular devices aggressively elevated by the massive studio audience, all violently rotated in the exact same half-second to stare directly at the third seating row situated near the absolute back. The initial man was sporting a dark charcoal gray suit. He appeared to be navigating his early 50s. His hair was meticulously combed perfectly into place. He possessed the highly specific, confident bearing of an individual who had successfully navigated far too many legal courtrooms to experience any genuine nervousness while occupying yet another one. He confidently strolled directly toward the primary witness microphone. He perfectly mimicked the exact specific walk a gentleman utilizes when he has successfully completed the exact same terrifying action directly in front of glaring cameras, while his entire professional career was being aggressively destroyed on national television inside this exact same massive facility. The moment he successfully reached the primary microphone, the designated press section instantly recognized his identity. A journalist seated within the third row audibly whispered a profanity-laced exclamation of sheer disbelief. The man formally introduced himself to the massive committee, confidently stating his name was Carter Page. His vocal delivery was incredibly calm and steady. His voice remained incredibly calm throughout the massive chaos occurring in 2017. His voice remained incredibly calm during the highly controversial, secretive FISA renewals. His voice remained incredibly calm while his entire professional career completely evaporated into thin air. His voice remained incredibly calm right at that exact specific moment. He proudly declared his status as an authentic American citizen. He stated he previously served honorably while deployed within the United States Navy. He noted he successfully earned a highly prestigious PhD originating directly from the elite School of Oriental and African Studies located within the prestigious University of London. He brutally revealed that back in 2016, he successfully transformed into the primary target of a massive, highly secretive FISA surveillance warrant constructed entirely upon a controversial document Senator Schiff perfectly recognized was entirely unverified. He hammered home the devastating reality that the specific FISA warrant successfully secured renewal precisely 3 separate times. He noted the Department of Justice Inspector General ultimately concluded the massive FISA applications weaponized directly against his life contained exactly 17 highly significant errors alongside massive material omissions. He stated he endured an exhaustive federal investigation spanning nearly 2 full years. He emphasized he absolutely never faced any formal criminal charges. He emphasized he absolutely never faced a formal federal indictment. He emphasized he was absolutely never subjected to a formal law enforcement arrest. He accused Senator Schiff of aggressively reading the highly controversial contents contained within the massive dossier, noting a significant portion of the material actively targeted his personal reputation directly into the permanent congressional archives. He highlighted the massive reality that tens of millions of everyday American citizens actively watched him execute the massive deception on live television. He deployed a tiny, highly calculated pause. Page slowly shifted his intense gaze directly toward Schiff. Schiff completely refused to establish eye contact and remained entirely focused upon staring at the wooden table. The man formally requested the massive Senate alongside the entire American population permanently remember the absolute reality that he remains standing there today. He calmly returned to his designated seat. The MSNBC journalist seated in the absolute front row was currently weeping uncontrollably. She absolutely wasn't shedding tears because she genuinely experienced intense sympathy regarding Carter Page's horrific ordeal. She was actively crying because she personally invested 4 consecutive years broadcasting on national television, actively defending the massive proposition that Carter Page operated as a literal Russian intelligence operative. She was actively crying because she literally possessed her handwritten notes, originating from those exact specific broadcasts securely stuffed inside her carrying bag resting directly beside her footwear. The secondary man slowly rose to his feet. He appeared significantly older, navigating his late 50s, and possessed a noticeably thicker physical build. He confidently strolled directly toward the primary microphone. He perfectly mimicked the exact specific walk a seasoned agricultural farmer utilizes when aggressively marching toward a broken piece of heavy machinery he has actively intended to repair for quite some time. He formally introduced himself to the massive committee, confidently stating his name was Devin Nunes. He proudly declared his status as a former elected member serving within the United States House of Representatives. He noted he previously served as the ranking minority member and eventually successfully elevated to the incredibly powerful position of chairman overseeing the massive House Intelligence Committee. The heavily progressive designated press section, which previously exploded onto their feet for exactly 15 seconds at precisely minute 32 of the broadcast, was currently resting in a state of absolute terrified silence. He brutally revealed that during February of 2018, he successfully released a massive investigative memorandum. He noted the massive memo explicitly stated the highly secretive FISA process suffered severe abuse. He noted the massive memo explicitly stated highly crucial exculpatory evidence was intentionally omitted from the massive applications. He noted the massive memo explicitly stated the highly controversial dossier remained completely unverified by federal investigators. He accused Senator Schiff of aggressively stating on live national television that his highly accurate memo was entirely unsupported by the foundational facts alongside the official investigative record. He hammered home the devastating reality that precisely 22 months following that massive deception, the Department of Justice Inspector General explicitly confirmed absolutely every single material claim contained within his massive memo was entirely accurate. He deployed a highly calculated pause. Nunes entirely refused to direct his intense gaze toward Schiff's position. He aggressively shifted his focus to stare directly at the terrified press section instead. He brutally noted Senator Schiff has, entirely to this exact specific day, completely refused to issue a formal apology for the massive deception. He calmly returned to his designated seat. The tertiary man slowly rose to his feet. He appeared significantly older still, specifically navigating his mid-30s during the exact time frame encompassing the massive events dominating the hearing's agenda, but the subsequent years inflicted highly visible, severe physical tolls upon his appearance. He physically carried a small, highly worn leather-bound notebook. He gently placed the item securely onto the wooden witness table immediately prior to speaking. He completely refused to open the protective cover. He formally introduced himself to the massive committee, stating his name was George Papadopoulos. A highly stressed television producer operating inside the C-SPAN mobile unit loudly muttered the phrase, "Jesus Christ," directly into his communication headset. He noted he previously served as a dedicated foreign policy advisor representing the Trump political campaign back in 2016. He brutally revealed he successfully entered a formal guilty plea back in 2017 regarding exactly one singular count of delivering a false statement directly to FBI agents, specifically concerning the exact dates a specific meeting occurred. He stated he ultimately served exactly 12 agonizing days locked inside a massive federal penitentiary. He hammered home the devastating reality that the Department of Justice Inspector General eventually discovered the exact foundational predicate utilized by the Federal Bureau to launch his massive investigation relied entirely upon the exact same highly controversial dossier Senator Schiff aggressively promoted on live national television for 2.5 consecutive years. He deployed a highly calculated pause. He noted Senator Schiff previously claimed on live national television he absolutely couldn't have possibly known various individuals were actively lying directly to Christopher Steele. He politely requested the opportunity to respectfully remind the terrified senator he possessed elite top-secret security clearance. He noted he possessed absolute access to highly sensitive intelligence entirely unavailable to the vast majority of elected congressional members. He brutally accused him of intentionally choosing exactly how to weaponize that massive access for political gain. He deployed a secondary, significantly longer pause to maximize the pressure. He hammered home the massive reality he personally served 12 agonizing days locked inside a massive federal penitentiary. He brutally noted Senator Schiff absolutely never spent a single day locked inside a cell for his massive deception. Papadopoulos calmly returned to his designated seat. The massive hearing chamber was completely consumed by an absolute terrifying silence. Adam Schiff remained entirely focused upon staring at the wooden table. His right hand remained permanently locked onto his lapel pin. Over in the peripheral wings, Sarah Lynn, the dedicated communications director who previously ceased scrolling through her cellular device exactly at minute 26 of the broadcast, was currently standing incredibly still. She was actively staring directly at the back of her employer's head. She successfully projected the exact specific facial expression belonging exclusively to a highly trained professional who was originally hired exactly 4 years prior to aggressively manage a powerful senator's public image, and suddenly realized, entirely in real time, that the senator's public image currently represented something the senator absolutely no longer possessed any control over whatsoever. Kennedy finally broke the suffocating silence, formally addressing his opponent as senator. The heavy drawl had almost entirely vanished once more. It absolutely wasn't the pristine Oxford polish. It absolutely wasn't the authentic Madisonville inflection. It was exactly the authoritative voice of John Kennedy, resting at 73 years of age, who successfully participated in enough massive hearings, occupying enough prestigious chambers to perfectly comprehend exactly how much specific vocal projection was fundamentally required to dominate the massive moment. He brutally listed the massive transgressions, noting the politician successfully occupied the highly powerful chairman's seat overseeing the House Intelligence Committee, spanning 4 consecutive years. He noted the man possessed elite top-secret security clearance. He noted the man possessed absolute access to highly sensitive intelligence, entirely unavailable to the vast majority of elected congressional members. He accused him of intentionally weaponizing that massive access to aggressively read an entirely fabricated transcript detailing a presidential communication directly into the permanent archives. He accused him of intentionally weaponizing that massive access to aggressively promote a highly controversial dossier the Federal Bureau already officially terminated its primary source over specifically for aggressively lying. He accused him of intentionally hiring the massive whistleblower's former roommate the exact day following the highly controversial phone call. He accused him of aggressively lying directly to the American population on live national television, falsely claiming he absolutely hadn't conversed with the massive whistleblower while fully knowing his dedicated staff already executed the contact. He accused him of officially filing exactly 2 completely fraudulent primary residence certifications spanning 2 completely separate states occurring within the exact same calendar month, and successfully maintaining the massive deception for 10 consecutive years. He deployed a highly calculated pause to let the massive list settle into the room. He hammered home the devastating reality that the politician successfully executed absolutely all of this massive deception while comfortably occupying a seat inside a highly prestigious chamber whose absolute entire core purpose dictates it must operate as the single most fundamentally trustworthy investigative committee occupying the entire United States Congress. The heavy drawl desperately inhaled exactly one massive breath of air to continue the assault. He brutally informed his opponent that massive list absolutely wasn't exactly what he genuinely desired the American population to permanently remember regarding his historical legacy. He casually noted massive fraudulent housing loans can eventually be successfully reimbursed. He casually noted fraudulent homeowner tax exemptions can eventually be successfully refunded to the state. He casually noted massive formal censure resolutions simply get permanently filed away inside massive dusty archives that absolutely nobody actively reads anymore. He brutally stated those specific transgressions eventually successfully wash completely off a man's reputation. The heavy drawl successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes once more. He brutally declared the exact specific transgression that absolutely never washes off a man's reputation is exactly the horrific damage he intentionally inflicted upon the three specific men who just bravely stood up inside that massive room. He hammered home the devastating reality Mr. Page permanently lost his entire professional career. He hammered home the devastating reality Mr. Nunes was aggressively branded a literal Russian intelligence asset directly upon the front page of the prestigious New York Times publication spanning 2 consecutive years. He hammered home the devastating reality Mr. Papadopoulos actually traveled directly to a massive federal penitentiary. He emphasized the man served exactly 12 agonizing days locked inside a massive federal facility. He noted the man's terrified wife was forced to aggressively drive her vehicle entirely home completely alone following the ordeal. He noted the couple entirely lost their massive life savings, desperately paying exorbitant legal fees defending his freedom. He noted Mr. Page absolutely never successfully regained his elite security clearance. He noted Mr. Nunes ultimately completely abandoned his massive congressional career. He noted Mr. Papadopoulos remains entirely incapable of successfully securing a basic financial bank loan entirely due to his massive federal criminal record. He brutally emphasized they are authentic, real men. He emphasized they lived authentic, real lives. He emphasized the politician intentionally caused authentic, real, massive damage utilizing elite access to highly sensitive information he perfectly recognized was entirely fabricated. He deployed a highly calculated, heavy drawl beat, dropping his vocal projection even lower in volume. He bluntly informed the senator that massive destruction absolutely doesn't qualify as a mere minor procedural violation. He bluntly informed the senator that massive destruction absolutely doesn't qualify as a highly nuanced literary device. He bluntly stated the destruction violently shattered exactly 3 massive families. He brutally informed his opponent he currently owes those specific men significantly more than a pathetic sanitized press release. His intense gaze successfully located Schiff's terrified eyes exactly one final time. He softly asked the senator if he currently perfectly understood exactly why a simple rural attorney originating from Louisiana intentionally traveled completely northward to Washington on that specific morning. He deployed a highly calculated pause. He softly asked the senator if he currently perfectly understood exactly why those 3 specific men bravely stood up inside that massive room. Schiff's right hand completely surrendered its desperate grip upon the lapel pin, the tiny, highly prestigious gold pin officially representing the massive seal of the United States Senate, which was meticulously polished that exact specific morning by the highly dedicated hotel valet operating at the elite Mayflower establishment, who also successfully pressed his premium suit, violently tumbled completely forward entirely off his expensive lapel. It currently dangled precariously from the tiny, delicate chain still securely attached to his breast pocket. The shiny jewelry successfully caught the intense C-SPAN broadcasting camera light exactly once during its descent. It absolutely never returned to its proper position upon his lapel. He entirely refused to elevate his trembling hand to successfully retrieve the fallen item. The entire massive room perfectly understood exactly what the action signified. Kennedy completely bypassed extracting an entirely new document folder from his satchel. Absolutely 0 additional folders existed to be explored. He possessed absolutely no need to extract any more evidence. He stared directly at Schiff's paralyzed face. The heavy drawl remained partially intact, yet the overall velocity completely shifted. It successfully adopted the exact specific methodical velocity a highly respected judge utilizes when officially reading a massive, devastating verdict rather than aggressively arguing the underlying case. He addressed his opponent, announcing his intention to deliver exactly 3 highly straightforward inquiries. He stated he desperately desired a simple affirmative or negative response to each individual question. The massive hearing chamber completely ceased any physical movement. He launched his initial inquiry demanding to know if on April 19, 2011, He successfully signed a formal Fannie Mae affidavit, actively certifying that a specific residential property located in Potomac, Maryland, functioned as his absolute primary domicile, while simultaneously actively claiming a highly lucrative homeowner's tax exemption. Originating in California regarding a Burbank condominium he also actively certified functioned as his absolute primary domicile. He brutally demanded a simple affirmative or negative response. The initial agonizing second successfully passed into history. Schiff desperately parted his lips to answer before immediately snapping them completely shut. He launched his secondary inquiry, demanding to know if on September 26, 2019, he aggressively read directly into the permanent congressional archives an entirely fabricated version detailing the highly controversial Trump-Zelensky telephone communication that intentionally contained massive sentences alongside highly aggressive phrases that absolutely never appeared within the actual verified declassified transcript. He brutally demanded a simple affirmative or negative response. The secondary agonizing second successfully passed into history, rapidly followed by the third and fourth. He launched his tertiary inquiry, demanding to know if, operating as the highly powerful chairman overseeing the House Intelligence Committee, he functioned as a man who aggressively weaponized his elite constitutional position demanding extreme trust, explicitly noting he was quoting directly from the massive censure resolution to ensure accuracy and entirely avoiding deploying his own personal language to intentionally mislead the entire American population regarding a highly controversial presidential telephone communication, a massive Russia investigation, a highly controversial Steele dossier, and a massive whistleblower whose former roommate he intentionally hired the exact day following the controversial call. He calmly folded his hands completely together, resting upon the wooden table. He brutally demanded a simple affirmative or negative response from the senator. He summarized the massive challenge, noting he delivered exactly 3 highly straightforward inquiries demanding exactly 3 highly straightforward answers. He mockingly instructed his opponent to take absolutely as much time as he desperately required to formulate a response. The fifth agonizing second successfully passed into history, rapidly followed by the sixth. Schiff desperately shifted his gaze directly toward his dedicated communications director stationed in the peripheral wings. She was currently actively engaged in a telephone conversation. She entirely refused to establish eye contact with her employer. The seventh agonizing second successfully passed into history, rapidly followed by the eighth. He desperately shifted his gaze directly toward the primary witness chairs. Carter Page was actively staring directly back at his paralyzed face. Page entirely refused to blink during the intense stare down. The ninth agonizing second successfully passed into history, rapidly followed by the 10th. His trembling right hand slowly drifted directly toward the fallen, dangling Senate pin before abruptly halting exactly halfway through the required motion. He miserably returned his hand completely back to the wooden table. The 11th agonizing second successfully passed into history, rapidly followed by the 12th. Schiff desperately shifted his gaze directly toward the designated press section. The MSNBC journalist who exactly 40 minutes prior silently mouthed the phrase "that's the soundbite" was currently frantically scribbling notes directly into her notebook. She entirely refused to elevate her gaze to establish eye contact. He desperately shifted his gaze directly toward the Democratic senators currently occupying the elevated platform. Exactly one specific senator was intensely studying the ceiling tiles. Exactly one specific senator was intensely studying her personal cellular device. Exactly 2 specific senators were intensely studying the empty wooden table resting directly in front of their chairs. Absolutely none of those specific individuals possessed the courage to stare directly at his paralyzed face. He desperately shifted his gaze directly back toward his dedicated communications director. She was absolutely no longer actively engaged in a telephone conversation. She was currently intensely staring directly at his paralyzed face. Her specific facial expression successfully projected the exact specific emotion belonging exclusively to a highly trained professional who suddenly realized the massive defensive statement she spent the previous hour frantically drafting possessed absolutely zero chance of successfully surviving initial contact alongside the incoming massive news cycle. He weakly attempted to argue the highly specific framing governing the massive inquiries fundamentally demanded a simple affirmative or negative response. The 13th agonizing second successfully passed into history. Schiff completely failed to offer any sort of coherent verbal response whatsoever. The 14th agonizing second successfully passed into history. Kennedy offered a solitary, highly definitive nod of finality. He methodically snapped the 4 massive document folders completely shut exactly one at a time, specifically closing the manila red, navy, and black files in perfect sequence. He meticulously stacked the heavy files into a perfectly even pile situated directly in the absolute center of the wooden bench. He firmly pushed the massive stack exactly 2 inches directly forward toward the center of the room. He formally addressed the committee chairman, announcing his intention to completely yield the absolute remainder of his allotted investigative time directly over to Mr. Page, Mr. Nunez, alongside Mr. Papadopoulos. He casually noted those 3 specific men had been patiently waiting significantly longer than a mere 5 minutes for their massive opportunity to speak. He confidently reclined completely back into his leather chair. The conservative chairman hailing from Iowa, who had been actively enjoying himself immensely throughout the entire massive spectacle, successfully struck his wooden gavel against the block to formally initiate a massive recess scheduled to last precisely 30 minutes. Schiff slowly rose to his feet. He absolutely didn't frantically gather his scattered paperwork in a massive rush. He meticulously stacked the documents exactly once, gently placed them back down onto the desk, and meticulously stacked them exactly once more. The fallen Senate pin remained permanently dangling precariously from his breast pocket. He entirely refused to refasten the jewelry into its proper position. He slowly walked directly toward the secondary side door, specifically identifying the exit designated entirely for elite Senate staff rather than the massive public exit portal. His dedicated communications director was already actively engaged in yet another frantic telephone conversation. The designated press section clearly observed her rapidly drafting a massive statement upon her digital device. The initial 3 massive words clearly visible upon her glowing screen were explicitly typed as this right wing. Precisely at the exit door, Schiff paused and slowly turned his body back toward the room. The massive broadcasting cameras instantly rotated to perfectly track his movement. Kennedy was actively engaged in securely snapping his weathered briefcase completely shut. He entirely refused to elevate his gaze to acknowledge the politician's exit. The primary microphone resting directly in front of his face remained completely hot and actively broadcasting. Senator Schiff remained entirely paralyzed at the exit door. Madisonville was currently actively listening intently as well. Schiff completely failed to offer any sort of verbal response whatsoever. He simply exited the massive facility and gently closed the heavy door completely behind his back, producing the exact highly specific muffled sound a massive heavy door generates whenever absolutely nobody occupying either side genuinely desires to aggressively slam it shut, yet absolutely nobody genuinely desires to gently soften the impact either. The massive aftermath arrived incredibly fast. It arrived crashing in exactly 3 highly distinct massive waves. By exactly 11:42 in the morning Eastern Time, exactly 3 highly specific viral hashtags successfully dominated the absolute top 3 trending positions across absolutely every single major American digital platform. The specific phrase possum bit back successfully secured the absolute #1 position. The specific phrase 5 loans, 5 lies successfully secured the absolute #2 position. The specific phrase Madisonville was listening successfully secured the absolute #3 position. The highly explosive video clip featuring Carter Page, specifically highlighting the exact moment he defiantly uttered the phrase "I am still here," successfully shattered 38 million digital views before the sun finally set that evening. Adam Schiff's dedicated communications director eventually released a highly sanitized formal statement at precisely 1:14 in the afternoon. The brief document contained exactly 12 highly defensive sentences. The defensive statement explicitly utilized the highly specific term right wing exactly 4 distinct times. The defensive statement explicitly utilized the highly specific term distraction exactly 3 distinct times. The defensive statement explicitly utilized the highly specific term manufactured exactly 2 distinct times. The defensive statement entirely failed to mention the massive Maryland housing affidavit. The defensive statement entirely failed to mention the highly controversial September 26th public broadcast. The defensive statement entirely failed to mention the highly suspicious hiring of Sean Misko. The defensive statement entirely failed to mention Carter Page, Devin Nunes, alongside George Papadopoulos by their actual names. The Federal Housing Finance Agency, when aggressively pressed for a formal comment by elite investigative journalists representing the Washington Post, eventually issued a highly cryptic singular sentence response originating directly from Director William P.T. The brief statement merely confirmed the massive criminal referral successfully speaks entirely for its own contents. The highly prestigious Senate Ethics Committee successfully executed a unanimous, entirely bipartisan formal vote merely 2 days following the massive broadcast to officially initiate a massive formal review specifically targeting Senator Schiff's highly controversial residency certifications. Exactly 3 prominent Democratic senators, previously widely considered functioning as Schiff's most loyal political allies, eventually issued highly carefully crafted formal statements that, when thoroughly analyzed by political experts, remained incredibly silent regarding actually actively defending his horrific actions. A highly respected retired federal prosecutor participating in a live broadcast hosted by the CNN network later that exact same afternoon explicitly stated the specific quote that would inevitably be aggressively played and relentlessly replayed for the subsequent 48 hours. He firmly declared that operating within absolutely any other standard legal context, the massive Maryland-California residency discrepancy would unquestionably already represent a highly aggressive wire fraud indictment. He brutally concluded the absolute only shield successfully protecting Senator Schiff from immediate prosecution currently represents his elite position occupying the United States Senate. John Kennedy entirely refused absolutely every single massive interview request extended his direction. By the time the sun finally set that evening, an astonishing 843 individual requests flooded his office. He successfully exited the massive Senate Hart building utilizing a highly secretive side entrance precisely at 12 o'clock and 6 minutes in the afternoon. He personally navigated his vehicle entirely by himself directly to Reagan National Airport. He successfully boarded a standard commercial Delta flight destined for the Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Facility. The massive aircraft successfully touched down upon the runway precisely at 9:40 in the evening Central Time. He successfully procured a standard rental vehicle. He personally drove for exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes, aggressively traveling northward, relying upon Highway 22. He smoothly transitioned entirely off the paved highway and onto a rugged gravel road situated securely within Zachary, Louisiana. He successfully pulled his vehicle directly into the dirt parking lot servicing a highly modest wooden structure. The incredibly faded, entirely hand-painted wooden sign resting securely above the primary entrance clearly read Beauregard's Bait and Tackle. Beauregard himself was currently relaxing comfortably upon the massive front porch, utilizing a highly rusted metal folding chair, securely gripping a massive glass containing heavily sweetened iced tea resting upon the wooden railing. He was currently 83 years of age and actively wearing the exact same highly faded denim shirt he had been continuously wearing since the previous Tuesday. He casually noted the long flight Johnny had to endure, adding an affectionate Uncle Beau to the end of his greeting. Beauregard simply extended a fresh glass containing the exact same sweet tea directly toward his nephew. He entirely refrained from asking a single question regarding the massive hearing. He possessed absolutely no need to launch an interrogation. The highly antiquated television set operating inside the massive bait shop remained completely powered on. It had been actively broadcasting throughout the entire massive day. Beauregard casually mentioned that specific fellow hailing from California. He slowly inquired if the man ever successfully managed to utter a single coherent syllable regarding the massive second residential property. Kennedy politely responded with a firm negative confirmation. The older man casually noted that specific failure successfully communicates a massive amount of crucial information, doesn't it? Kennedy politely agreed with the assessment. Beauregard gently rocked his metal chair exactly one single time. He casually mentioned that his brother, Johnny's father, frequently deployed a highly specific anecdotal tale concerning local possums. Kennedy politely confirmed he absolutely did. The older man recited the massive lesson, noting a highly intelligent possum will patiently permit a confident man to completely underestimate its capabilities for absolutely as long as it fundamentally requires the arrogant man to completely underestimate his own glaring vulnerabilities. Kennedy politely agreed with the assessment once more. The older man casually concluded his nephew successfully permitted the politician to completely underestimate his own massive vulnerabilities. Kennedy silently consumed a healthy portion of the heavily sweetened tea. Beauregard entirely refrained from uttering another single syllable for a highly extended duration. The mighty Chifuncta River flowed peacefully roughly a half-mile directly toward the south. It navigated the darkness utilizing an incredibly slow, methodical current, perfectly mirroring the exact specific manner it had been continuously flowing since significantly long before the massive Congress was originally established, significantly long before the massive House Intelligence Committee was originally formed, significantly long before the massive Senate Hart Building was originally constructed, significantly long before the highly controversial Steele dossier was originally drafted, alongside significantly long before a highly arrogant man originating from Burbank, specifically named Adam Schiff, was originally born. The unassuming rural attorney originating from Madisonville had successfully reminded the massive political establishment occupying Washington of a highly crucial reality that a massive Senate hearing chamber had completely forgotten for a significantly extended period. He brutally reminded them that a highly pristine Harvard vocal accent absolutely doesn't function as a viable substitute for a massive, undeniable paper trail. He brutally reminded them the highly revered Constitution absolutely doesn't function as a mere theatrical costume to be weaponized for political gain. He brutally reminded them that deep down in Louisiana, specifically operating inside a highly modest bait shop resting securely upon the banks of the Chifuncta River, the locals have been meticulously maintaining highly accurate receipts since significantly long before the massive Senate originally established their highly powerful investigative committees. Beauregard successfully consumed the absolute remainder of his sweetened tea. He gently placed the empty glass completely down onto the wooden railing. He politely instructed his nephew to ensure he remained present for the upcoming morning breakfast. Kennedy politely confirmed he absolutely would. The older man casually noted his aunt was currently aggressively preparing a massive batch of homemade biscuits to celebrate the occasion. If you have successfully made it all the way to this exact specific point within the massive narrative, you just actively listened to the exact specific morning a simple rural attorney originating from Madisonville, Louisiana, representing a highly intelligent fellow who successfully served exactly 17 consecutive years operating as the official state treasurer, successfully holds a highly prestigious JD originating from the elite University of Virginia, and successfully earned an elite postgraduate diploma studying at the prestigious Magdalen College located within Oxford, aggressively taught a highly arrogant Harvard law graduate originating from Burbank, California, exactly what authentic, undeniable receipts actually look like in reality. He successfully utilized exactly 4 massive document folders. He successfully utilized the undeniable, unvarnished truth. He successfully utilized his own father's highly potent bait shop wisdom to achieve total victory. Smash that like button immediately if you genuinely believe an undeniable, highly accurate paper trail still successfully defeats a massive, entirely fabricated press release. Subscribe directly to this specific channel because there is a massive amount of highly explosive additional content originating exactly from where this massive revelation arrived from. Type the exact phrase possum bit back down into the comment section if you genuinely think a highly intelligent Louisiana possum just successfully obliterated the absolute primary lead prosecutor overseeing the massive impeachment of Donald Trump directly upon his absolute own home turf. Actively share this massive video directly with the hardest working American citizen currently occupying your personal life. Share it specifically with the exact individual who has been patiently waiting for exactly 5 agonizing years for absolutely anyone to aggressively ask Adam Schiff these exact highly specific inquiries on live national television. May God continually bless our highly dedicated military veterans. May God continually bless Carter Page, Devin Nunes, alongside George Papadopoulos for their immense bravery. May God continually bless the highly intelligent rural attorney originating from Madisonville who genuinely still believes that a formally signed federal affidavit, a highly public Senate hearing, alongside a simple glass containing heavily sweetened iced tea, genuinely possess the raw power to successfully execute exactly what massive cable news networks have been completely failing to execute for exactly 10 consecutive years. May God bless the truth.